We have breaking news out of Greece. Live is CNN senior international correspondent Nima Elbag.
Well, for the Syrians and their families. Welcome back to the program. All these hours since EGYPTAIR Flight 804 disappeared over the Mediterranean, and as new facts start to flow in, so do the questions about what could have happened to cause the airliner to crash. With us to try to answer some of them is aviation safety investigator David Gleave. He joins me now from Dubai. Mr. Gleave, welcome to the program. You heard the Vice President of EGYPTAIR list a whole load of new information, including that the debris has been found, that they have not yet, obviously it's way too early to determine exactly what happened, and that all possibilities are on the table. What did you take away mostly from what he said?
Well, the first thing is that the airline is reacting as it appears that we require it to react, by looking after the families first. They haven't released too much information to the press, and they're focusing on that element whilst the government machinery starts to run with the investigation. We've seen that they've apparently identified wreckage already. I was rather worried that people just finding things floating in the sea could be, as we saw with the loss of Malaysia 370, anything that was found in the sea could have been the aeroplane first of all, and we were searching in completely the wrong place. So it's good news that the search is starting to narrow the area down, and it's going to be some period of time before we can draw anything technically as an answer. But certainly some of the investigations are starting already.
Let me ask you, because you mentioned the Malaysia flight. I mean, still all these years later, we don't really know a huge number of answers to that. Give me the sort of comparison between where they have found the wreckage of this flight compared to the depth of the sea and the difficulty over where they think Malaysia Airlines went down. In other words, will they be able to get it easier?
Well, in this particular case, we have pingers, which are transmitters on the black boxes that we're trying to recover with the data and the cockpit conversation. Those should be good for a month or more in the sea. It's a relatively small search area. With any luck, there's not any bad weather. There's relatively little tide and sea swell in the Mediterranean as opposed to in the deep Indian Ocean. And it's nothing like 15,000 feet depth that the Australian led search has to contend with west of Perth. So you require relatively stable seas to be able to tow the listening devices to locate the aeroplane. So once this equipment is flown and the ships are chartered and have got out to the right area, then the search should be down to the matter of a few days to isolate where the wreckage is. But things will be going on already behind the scenes. They'll start to identify which Navy divers from which particular country will work together and train them. You heard the Vice President there saying that they've already been through some of the maintenance records. Well, that will be a big interest, and the training records of the flight crew. The meteorological records, they'll start to pull those off for things that the flight may have encountered and forecasts and things like that. So a lot of background work will go on, even though they haven't actually located the exact wreckage or found anything that they can work with back in the laboratories at this moment in time.
Although they do say they have found debris, so and wreckage, so that's interesting in and of itself. What I found really interesting was the way Captain Adel outlined all the security checks that have been done on the key legs of this flight, from Cairo to Paris, and then Paris, obviously it was returning back to Cairo. The cockpit crew, the cabin crew, the ground security staff, the maintenance staff, all of that, because obviously everybody is trying to figure out what happened. How does something like this come on board if all the checks have been done, if indeed what the U.S. and what the aviation minister in Cairo suggested, that terror was a leading, at least the top theory right now?
Yes, I mean, it could be the Americans have some information from intelligence agencies that point towards that. Whether probabilistically we've lost Airbus aircraft at high altitude through minor equipment failures and human errors. So we have to be slightly careful. Certainly in Egypt, it may be biased slightly towards security, but realistically the flight originated in Paris, which has some quite reasonable security at the airport. No doubt the 3 security guards that were on the aeroplane were examining what was happening during the aircraft turnaround and things like that. So if indeed it was a bomb, there are still some loopholes in the system which make it very difficult but not impossible to get a bomb on board the aeroplane. Possibly one of these was exploited, but no doubt the investigation will the security investigation will run in parallel, going through the videotapes that they take of all the passengers' luggage that was searched in Paris, through the X-ray machines and things like that. So there'll be a very comprehensive security investigation going on behind the scenes, looking into passenger backgrounds, until such time as the normal conventional accident investigators say, we can see this, perhaps here it indicates a mechanical failure, not a bomb.
Mr. Gleave, we're just hearing more and more details about the passenger manifest, and we understand 2 Canadians were among all the passengers, including there was a British person, there was French, there were Egyptians, and people from many other countries. But when you first heard the news today from the Greek authorities that there was this sudden turn at 90 degrees to the left and then a turn of 360 degrees and this sudden drop, what does that tell you as an aviation expert? And by the way, Vice President Captain Adel said there had been no distress signal, contrary to earlier media reports.
Well, to deal with the distress signal, first of all, sometimes these get confused in media reports. Sometimes the pilots will declare a mayday, but if there's a problem, they must fly the aeroplane first. That's their first priority, to aviate, then to navigate, then to communicate. So you sort out the problem first of all, and then you say, could I have some assistance, such as a priority landing or the fire engines at the airport or something like that. So the crew being very busy flying the aeroplane is not unusual in not emitting a distress call. And secondly, when the aircraft hits the ground, if it were to hit ground particularly rather than the sea, then we have emergency locator beacons that may start to transmit, which may be picked up by satellites. So there's 2 different forms of distress signal, one from the crew and an automatic system. Back to your other question, then really everything is just open. The source of that information, I'd like to know where it came from. Was it the old, what we call primary radar that just blasts energy off into space and catches the reflected energy? The tracking systems that work with that are quite inaccurate when it comes down to aircraft descending rapidly or tracking bits of aeroplanes that are broken up. It's not designed for that at all. If it's information transmitted from the aeroplane, say, for example, the tail has fallen off, but still you have power to the cockpit systems and can still transmit, then it may well indicate that the tail has separated if you're starting to oscillate in yaw through those numbers that have been quoted.
You know, you heard, again, Vice President Captain Adel saying that he did not want to address any of these movements because, as you've just indicated, there's so many questions about how they may have or may not have been detected. Anyway, on that note, David Gleave, thank you so much for joining us from Dubai. Coming up, we turn from breaking news to remember a man who broke the mold. A look at the incredible life of the broadcasting legend Morley Safer.